Hey guys, welcome to Surf Show and Tell. I'm Noel Salas and today's review is on one model in 5 different constructions. Now I chose the sampler because it's my favorite small wave board, and I went with the stock dims. This is 5'7" by 19 by 2 5/16. I'm 5'9" and 170 pounds. So I'm excited to talk about the new technologies and these 5 different constructions. I know there's a bunch more out there, but at least this is a start. I think what I wanted to do more than anything and talk about was why. What are you looking for in a new board? With all the new choices, let's talk about what I think is important is the flex pattern. What does it feel like under your feet? Number one, right? I think we need to talk about durability, the strength of a board and the life of the board and how long it'll last you. That's really important. The other thing that everybody's just talking tons about, and it's not just in the surf industry, is things that are eco-friendly. And I think that's a big deal. We've got to do our part for the planet to make it last longer, and I agree with it, but we also have to have performance. And then the most important part for all of us is cost. We've got to know what we can afford, and then we want to get what our expectation is. This board is the staple of today's surfing. It's a polyurethane foam with a polyester resin. And for me, this board feels like home. I've been riding this type of board since I was 9 years old. So when I get on it, it kind of sets the bar for everything I ride and test that is not the same. So, you know, with the polyurethane foam, you're getting its strength from the stringer and from the glass job. You can see that I did a Team Light glass, and when you get into a light board like this, you're gonna have pressure dents, which will beat the board up with me pounding on it, but it will also affect the duration and the lifespan of the board. So the pros, when they get a good board, they put them on ice, like they put them in the closet and they just wait for events to come. And I know that when you have a good board, you wanna ride it all the time. So I think that's one of the big things about the PUs is the duration of the life of the board, right? So the other thing I think is something that we need to talk about is the flotation of the board. It feels different, and it is different. And we'll talk about that as we get into the other models, right? The other thing we need to talk about is that the PU is not eco-friendly. So, and that's something that everybody's talking about. How can we do our part? But for me, you get into eco-friendly as long as the performance is there. And if the performance isn't there, then surfing's just not as fun. So you keep going back to what is feeling the best under your feet. So the PU is hard to compete with all the new technologies. The other thing I wanted to mention is that surfboards are expensive, right? Well, this board, I typed it into the CI website. This exact board is $695, which isn't cheap in any stretch, but that's where we're at today. So this is an EPS board. There's a couple different types of foams out there, but this one is an expanded polystyrene foam, which is an open cell foam, and an epoxy resin. Open cell foam meaning that if it got a ding, the cells are open and susceptible to pulling in water, and that's exactly what it will do unless you get out and get it fixed. But some of the benefits to this type of foam is that it's super light and it's dense. The deck's going to be stronger. It's going to have less pressure dents and it'll last me longer, which is a big deal when you're paying extra. We'll talk about how much extra later. The next thing is the buoyancy of the board. At the same liters, they don't float the same. I would say that this is about a half a liter to 1 whole liter feeling in flotation under me when I'm paddling and surfing. Which in small waves, I think that's okay. As long as it's light and you can get to do what you want to do, it feels good. The other thing is, there are some drawbacks besides it being open cell and pulling in water. It's also got less flex characteristics than a polyurethane. So with that, it's like, what are you looking for? Like for me, I want a board with some flex. I want a board that's got some pop and spring in small waves. That's especially when I want it. But you know what, to be honest with you, this board felt good under my feet. I really liked it. I felt like when I was coming off the bottom, it was loading and springing me in and out of turns. I rode this board quite a bit. and I was pretty satisfied and happy with the footage and how it felt under my feet. Now, Channel Islands is doing a special resin. It's sustainable, which is better for our environment and the VOCs. That's another bonus that the polyurethane doesn't have. But here's the drawback. This board, new, is $825. So you have to weigh out what is important to you. So Flex felt fine, and I think that you have to decide if durability is what's most important and the eco-friendliness. So this is a new construction that Channel Islands is doing. It's called FLEXBAR. Now it has an expanded polystyrene foam and epoxy resin, just like the EPS we talked about earlier. But what's different and unique about this one, you can see it has no stringer, and it's got this high density flex bar in the middle, which has been routed out of the top deck because there's 3 parts that make up this board. There's 2 layers of EPS foam sandwiched by 1 thin one in the middle. And that's how they're getting the strength of the board, the inner structure strength, and they're also controlling flex with this flex bar right here and the carbon fiber. So on the smaller wave boards, they can move this bar forward and you're gonna get that spring and that pop in and out of your turns, which is a really big deal on small waves. And it's something I have a preference and I lean towards that. Now, as you get into a standard shortboard, they move the bar back a little bit, and that's gonna have a little bit more control, and that's a big deal too. So let me also start by saying this. I've had this board for roughly 8 months. I've done a review on it before, and when we did I had the idea to do the 5 construction, I thought a good test for the flex bar would be to see if it still has the flex and if the board still got pop 8 months later. Now, in between reviews of all these other boards that I've done, I'm writing this board because I've been working on errors. This deck's pretty beat up, but it's got great life in it. So the durability is there. It does have the Team Light glassing, and I think for guys that are 170 and lighter, I highly recommend that. But what's cool about this is, let's talk about this eco resin that they're doing. It checks off the sustainable stuff for the VOCs. So we're hitting all the checkpoints right now. Let's look at the cost of this board is $885, right? Now, if you remember, last EPS was $820. The jump from the PU was $695. So we're looking at $125 increase to an EPS, and then for 65 bucks more, you can get a flex bar. And then Channel Island actually topped it off with 1 year, any break or buckle, they'll replace it as long as you have your receipt. So the flex bar felt really good under my feet. It felt like it had tons of spring and lots of life. And in the video, you'll see I'm riding a white flex bar and a yellow. It's all the same board. I just painted it because I wanted to liven it up and make it a kind of a fun review. So this construction is called XTR. It's an extruded polystyrene foam, which is a closed cell foam, and it has an epoxy resin. Now, I didn't say this earlier, but every epoxy foam core has to have an epoxy resin. So with this being a closed cell foam, when you get a ding, it won't suck in water, which is quite the opposite of an open cell foam. So this is also going to be more dense, and with it being a more dense foam, you're going to get good buoyancy or good flotation, and you're also going to get great durability in the deck. So let's look at the deck. I rode this board a ton. I did a bunch of errors. I'm not very good at errors. I fall all the time. The board hits me or whatever, and the dents are minimal. And I think that's going to help over the duration of me owning the board for it to last long and hold its flex. It's great. So it's a stringerless board, but this blue part here is a high density foam. And for those of you guys that are like that 120 to like 150, 155 range, you wouldn't even see the carbon Kevlar strips here, right? This is for somebody like my weight that's in that 155, 140 to 175 range. So I'm 170 pounds. So they prescribed this particular board for my weight. And the flex characteristics in the extruded foam compared to the expanded foam is much better. And that's what we're after. I'm looking for a board that has long lasting life and it has good flex patterns, right? And it feels good under my feet. And I liked it. It was loading good on my bottom turns. I felt like the board was really fast. It did have that extra float that I was looking for, and I liked it. But let's talk about what they're doing with eco-friendly. Now, I didn't talk to XTR about them using sustainable epoxy resins, but I'm sure they can, because most of these boards you order custom from their website. Now, what is the cost of this board? It came in at $815, and at $815, I think that's very competitive with the other constructions we've talked about. And it's got the long life. The last thing I think that I have to point out is that they have a built-in ventilation inside the deck, and that's going to keep the board from delaminating, and that will also make the board last a long time. So this next construction is VARIAL foam. It's a proprietary formula, it's a closed cell foam, and you can glass it with either polyester resin or epoxy resin. This one has an epoxy resin. It's super, super light. It's very dense because the foam's 7 times more rigid than a polyurethane foam. That's going to give me more strength, and it's also going to float better. So let's look at the strength real quick, because I rode this board a bunch and the deck's really strong. There's just one little dent here and then maybe a little dent here, but for the most part, the board's in really good shape, and I rode this board a bunch. Now, you can see it's a stringless board, and they don't have any carbon fiber because the foam has the strength in itself. And what's cool about the foam that they have, since it's proprietary, I don't know a whole lot about the foam. I know they make aerospace parts out of it and helicopter blades, but it's the foam's job is to support the skin in which you pick to put on the board. So an epoxy resin is going to have stiffer flex characteristics. And I noticed it. I noticed it quite a bit because I've ridden the same exact board and same dims with the polyester resin, and I felt it was loading and giving me that flex and spring in and out of turns better for what I liked, okay? So this one was a little bit stiff for me off the bottom, coming off backside, and I struggled a little bit with that, getting that speed and spring in and out of turns. But I think if you're a little bit heavier, you might want that extra durability and that extra strength, and you'll probably flex it better than I could because I'm 170 pounds. So for you epoxy guys, you might actually really like it. And for you guys that like polyurethane, go with the polyester resin, and I think you'll love it. Okay, I'm not seeing anywhere on here if it's eco-friendly with the resins, but I'm sure they are looking at sustainable resins, and I'm sure that's coming if it's not something they're doing already. The last thing I want to talk about is price, because the VARIAL foam is very expensive. This board came in at $1,000. Now, you can order it with epoxy for $1,000, or you could get it at the polyester resin for about $880. I think the $880 is more in that competitive range for the different constructions that we've been talking about. But for the most part, I think VARIAL's very innovative, and I like it. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the review. Look, we're just scratching the surface to all the different new constructions. So there, I'm sure you have lots of questions. Feel free to ask me questions in the comment field below. And if you like the show, you can subscribe. And you can follow me on Instagram under Surf Show and Tell, and you can find out what we're up to and what we're doing next. See you in the water. Take care.